I'm going to be kind of bummed when I don't know if that's fair. We're getting Tommy Angelo is going to be writing new harmonica bumper music
Yeah, I mean,
for
come
us
on, that's going to
here.
be awesome. It's going to.
I know.
Yeah, I'll miss the song. We can throw it in every once in a while, but
That's true. That's a good point. It'll never be gone forever. In case you haven't guessed, folks, that music for now means that it is the Rec Poker Podcast Forums Edition, and I'm your host, Jim Reed. I'm very excited to be here. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and website AMP. And if you want to know more about me, I'm a member of the Wrecking Crew, just like some of these wizards here. So you can go to rec.poker/Jim and find out all about me and where to reach me. And since I've got the best job in the world, every week I get to sit around with a bunch of cool cats like this and talk poker strategy. Cool cats, why don't you tell the world where they can reach you?
Yeah, I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on PokerStars, and I'm 5B5 on Twitter.
I'm John Somsky, and I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman50 everywhere.
So just like every week, we're all sitting around at 8 p.m. Central on a Monday night. We're playing in the nightly home game with play money on PokerStars, stealing each other's trips, trying to get one of these snazzy bronze pins up there. And just like every week, we are going to take a forum post from rec.poker and talk about it here amongst the group. And I'll just remind everyone that while premium members are welcome to join our podcast and bring a forum post that they put in and talk about it on the air with us, you don't need to be a premium member to post in the forums. It's completely free. Come to rec.poker, get a free community account. All it takes is an email and a smile, and you can get yourself, get some questions answered by the panel of wizards here. So this week, we're looking at a post from our very own 5x5 himself, Chris Jones, who was cruising along in an America's Card Room tournament. So, Chris, take us through the post. What made it look like an interesting spot to you?
Well, I was doing a review of this tournament, so I often try to review things, either tournaments that went well or didn't go well, and I was reviewing them. And so we are just in the money here, and I am 4th overall in chips. I've got 98 big blinds. And this is the hand that started a precipitous downfall into the abyss of nothingness. And I didn't cash for very much. And I was trying to break it down and figure out, some of the mistakes I made. But this was the beginning of the fall. I'm kind of curious about this spot. And so I thought I'd bring it. So anyway, we are 4th overall in chips. We've got 98 big blinds. We are in the big blind. And the player to my left has been very active. I've got over 200 hands on them, and they've got a 31 VPIP. They've 3-bet like 13 or 14% of the hands. So they're very active. I've seen showdowns from some of their under the gun opens where they had 7-6 offsuit. So they're opening really widely. So I feel fairly comfortable defending widely. I'm not. So anyway, they open from under the gun, folds around to me in the big blind, and I have 9-6 of hearts, and I elect to defend. And they are doing this from a stack that's pretty decent. It's probably like I'm looking at it now. It's like a 47, 48 big blind stack. So we've got them, double in chips. And we've got 9-6 of hearts, so we call, and the flop comes. Or any questions there or thoughts there before I?
It's a min raise from early position?
It is that is a good question.
It looks like a min raise, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a min raise. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I'm calling 9-6 suited there. Closing the action, good odds. It's a hand that you're going to be able to, you're going to know where you are with it a lot of the time, even though it's out of position. Doesn't feel like a good spot for a 3-bet. So
yeah, I think that's a pretty standard big blind defend with a 9-6 suited. As long as it's suited, you have that extra equity.
Yeah.
So I think this is a standard defense here.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some players who I would fold this against, some under the guns who are a little more snug. I just feel like it's a hand you can get a little into some trouble with against an under the gun open. But this player, I felt very comfortable doing this with. But it does lead to some trouble. So the flop comes three of spades, six of diamonds, eight of clubs. So we get a rainbow flop and we hit middle pair. We check. I'm probably checking although this is an interesting kind of flop to consider a potential lead here, but I still haven't incorporated that into my game because I haven't quite figured it out yet. But I think this is the exact kind of flop that some players would consider, potentially a big blind lead here. But I do check, and the player bets out about a third pot. And with middle pair, I think it's pretty uncontroversial. I just call. The rest, I think this hand gets more interesting as we get into later streets. But if anyone wants to talk about the flop, we can.
I think it's one of those spots where you've actually got enough equity to call. It's the kind of board I wouldn't mind doing some check raising on with other parts of my range. But as it is, I think we're okay to just make a call here and see what happens.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Is it possible to check raise this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with middle pair, because what you're targeting now is you want to blow the guy off of his overcards, right?
Yep.
If he's got ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack type hand, you're dead to any card over a 9, right?
Yep.
So you're going to get it's going to get very scary. So maybe it's an opportunity here to throw that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought
out there,
and especially because sometimes the check raise, because this board is heartless. It's sort of interesting. It's an interesting thing because I think if we get blown off of it, we're not that upset.
Right.
I mean, we've got some equity with the middle pair, but I would be, if we had 6-9 of spades or whatever, I'd be less. I'd sort of less want to get blown off my equity.
Yeah, and this smashes our range compared to his range, right?
Yeah,
this is what you're looking for as a big blind defense. Yep. This is a type of flop that you should be able to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe that's an interesting thing to consider. To consider some kinds of check raises in these spots, especially on these sort of advantage boards.
And I'd be more inclined to do it against someone in later position who had more hands they can fold in that range. Like, part of the problem is that under the gun position is just tight enough that a lot of it's going to be pairs and I mean, I still have a lot of unpaired overcards that we'd like to get to fold there, but I feel like it's a better candidate against a late position open. Mm-hmm. We do get a comment here in the chat.
Yeah, I saw asking about c-bet. I mean, this player has followed through with those sort of aggressive pre-flop. I don't know the exact numbers because I don't have them in front of me, but I remember that they were somebody who were quite frequently double, triple barreling, to a degree or to a level where they couldn't always have it, and sometimes getting caught with it. The time I saw him with the 7-6 offsuit, it was they didn't flop a straight or whatever. They were just bluffing with 7 high. So they're a very capable player where our 6 is, I think, likely good right now. Although we'll see if I'm right, but it may turn out that I'm not. But at least I'm capable of being very good here in a lot of spots. So with that, the turn, and I agree, Rob, with your assessment. Like, basically any Broadway card here is really scary, even with our 6. And so it's when I see the turn, I'm pretty grateful for it, which is the 8 of spades. So we now have a board of 3 of spades, 6 of diamonds, 8 of clubs, 8 of spades, and I feel like that's one of the best cards we could have possibly hit, really. Obviously we could get some straightening cards or another 6, but I'm not putting this player on a ton of 8s, but I will maybe find out that I'm wrong. but I feel like this is a good card for my range as well.
Yeah.
And it's so much so that I considered a lead here. But given the aggressive nature of this player, I felt like my best approach was to continue a check call line. So I elected to check, and this player bet. Kim will like this. Hit the half pot button, and because it is like literally 50% of the pot, I elect to call.
So first of all, I think this calls for that. Was that hashtag not pet vet approved? If we're going to start seeing half pot bets here, so obviously this player has revealed themselves to be some sort of donkey fish with the half pot bet, and we can just proceed with that knowledge in mind. It's such a good card for our flop. I wonder, is this a spot where you consider to check raise? Like, because I remember when we were doing the commentary for your heads up play, Chris, Ryan LaPlante was talking about leading a lot more on turns and rivers, and how people aren't check raising enough on later streets. And I wonder when you're in this position now, so you're check, you're looking at the turn bet, and when you call, are you planning to call a river with a pair of sixes? Like, is your pair of sixes a value call on the river? Because if it is, then I think you've nailed it, and it's exactly the right thing. Let's let him keep bluffing into you too wide. But if you feel like you might have to shut down on the river, and he's going to bet anyway because he's aggressive, I don't know. I mean, that paired eight really has to be frightening to him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to most normal under the gun ranges, I feel like
most of his holdings.
Yeah.
Most of his holdings, right? But obviously, given the fact that he can have 7-6, he can have a lot of eights, but he also can have a lot of non-eights, right? I think like that's one of the things about people who have really wide ranges is people are like, oh God, they could have anything, but that's right. They could have anything that's garbage as well.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I did have this I thought for a while about leading, but I didn't. But I never had the thought about check raising this turn, and maybe that's another spot where I could give some thought to this spot. If I don't check raise the flop, maybe this is a spot that could be a check raise spot, because we'll find out if he has an 8 pretty quickly if we do that.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure I think it's a good play. Like, but it's a spot where I find like we're not often enough finding spots like this where we can turn a marginal hand into a bluff. I mean, we just don't do it. So yeah, I don't know. I like this point from Kim too, that says it might even be a fold versus early position when they bet this card, which is great for you. And I think that's one thing that we got to figure out is, are we playing range versus range? Are we playing card versus range? Is our opponent playing their cards versus our range, right? Like, this is where it gets hard to get level.
I agree with. I think that's a great comment, and I think I think Kim's exactly right against sort of an unknown opponent. But I really feel like this player, and maybe I'm sort of like I'm talking myself into sort of bad play by a value. But this player, I think, was not very positionally aware, not very stack aware, and seemed to just value aggression at all costs without any kind of sense of the way you should sort of play some of these spots. So it was very much a player dependent line I was taking here. Like I said, I would fold this hand pre-flop in a lot of cases, and I would certainly to people's double barrels in this spot against an under the gun range that wasn't a pretty wild player. I'm rarely continuing probably with this hand, but I felt pretty good in my read, although I will say it might turn out to be wrong.
And I think that's one thing that we do have to be conscious of is, I think it was Andrew Brokus who said, Like when they give an inch, you take a mile. When they move an inch, you move a mile. When it comes to tendencies of our opponents, and I guess I always take that to mean if you think your opponent is over bluffing in that spot, you don't call just a little bit more. In this, like you actually have to you just call because in the long run this player is over bluffing, and so I think the only way you can exploit that is by exploiting it, the range, right? Not the cards. So. And you've been very consistent about that this whole time. You've been very consistent about saying, this is a spewy player. I want to be in a position where they're betting their bluffs into me. So,
And I will say, I mean, my thought was, okay, let's get to a river. We'll evaluate. I feel like I'm good right now, but there's a lot of, bad cards from my range. And there's a lot of spots where I might be, if they triple on a bad card, I'm probably going to be giving up. And so, if a 6 comes, I'm feeling pretty good. The card that does come, I think, is the one that is a pretty confusing one, and I think that's where we're going to have to do some evaluation. But I'm also just seeing in the chat here, what do you think about a pre-flop raise?
and that's also from Roger Shute, the first ever silver pin winner at
Wow.
Rec Poker.
Well,
So we've got greatness in the chat tonight.
Must know better than me. And honestly, it's another really great question because I never considered it. I kind of wanted to get. One of the reasons I didn't, but it's not necessarily a reason not to do it. I felt like this player was also gonna over bluff raise me back, and I don't know. So it was basically I want to play pots with this player, and I want to give my chance to see my 9-6 and see a flop. But it could be a decent thing. I mean, sometimes you fight aggression with aggression. So
it's a good hand for board coverage.
Yep.
It's not great. You'd rather be doing it with a hand like 6-7 or 7-8 or something like that. That's going to have more ways to play later. But it does cover a lot of boards. It's not really that good a hand that you're loving the idea of getting it in as a call either.
Yeah.
So that usually makes it a pretty good candidate for a 3-bet fold. And I don't like to over 3-bet into under the gun early position ranges, but in the free Jatin course, we did talk a lot about how we're just not doing it enough, even against those tight under the gun ranges. There's still a lot of folds there, and it is kind of one of those hands that I don't know if people want to put it in a 3-betting range all the time. It's just not a very good hand, but why not? Yeah. Let's get frisky.
Yeah. And maybe that is it's something definitely. So I think the interesting thing that we're talking about here that is giving me some pause is like there's a lot of questions here about raising basically every street, and none of them were really on my radar. So it's definitely something I need to be thinking about more for sure.
And I think, and when we play against under the gun, Chris, I think we all get passive, right? Because we think, they've got all these big pairs.
Yep.
And so I think that's a trap for us too.
Yeah, I know. And I think that, under the gun ranges, I really do respect. And even, and I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here because like, I don't respect this player's range, and that's why I'm calling him. It's why I'm calling down here. But I also, if I'm sort of still treating them with some respect because I'm not considering raising them. And that I think is probably just going halfway with that. And I think probably if I don't respect that they're not positionally aware, then maybe I need to be taking more aggressive lines in these kind of spots. But anyway, as played, we get to a river, which comes as the 9 of clubs. So we've now hit top pair on this board. It's the board is 3 of spades, 6 of diamonds, 8 of clubs, 8 of spades, 9 of clubs, and we're holding 9-6 of hearts. I'm now thinking that any 6 I now beat, that was beating me potentially. And so that, I mean, that's great, but I also start to lose to some other things with this river card. So I check, and I get another half pot button bet. And this is the spot where I really thought really hard. This is now getting very expensive. My hand improved, but it's not really great improvement. I'm beating, basically the only thing that it improved that I'm beating now is other sixes. So, if he's got an 8, if he's got any kind of overpair, given that this player had 7-6 offsuit, this could have also made a straight. So there's a definitely some, we're behind by a lot, but I thought really hard, and I'm not sure what to do in this spot once we get here.
Yeah. John, did you want to jump in there? Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, for me, when I play this type of player, assuming your read is right, that it's overly aggressive, I often go into more of a trapping type of mode. So I am, and this is the perfect trapping type of hand, or bluff catching type of hand. You don't really have much value that they should be calling you with if you were to bet. So I think check calling is the best way to get your value from there. Now, it could be everyone, no matter how bad, loose, whatever of a player, occasionally they're going to hit some cards. And the way I tend to look at that is, you're supposed to pay them off. They've earned that. By all of the spewy plays that they have made, they've earned that call from you. Not that, if you're beat, you should still fold, but you should be, assuming your read is relatively sound, then you should be making enough chips on the plays when they are overextending themselves that you're okay in this particular spot.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a minute to hear from our friend Jonathan Little, and then we'll come back and hear from the chat and put this baby to bed.
Have you ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead? What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it, or do you just call? What do you do with ace-king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/recpoker right now.
Now, he didn't have anything to say about what happens when the turn pairs. Come on, Jonathan.
Yeah. I'm sure he does on Poker Coaching, though. I'm sure.
He'd say to float the turn. That's what Jonathan Little
he does like that, doesn't he?
Yep.
So Kim has a comment in the chat here when we're facing this bet on the river, and I think it's a good point here. So let's just kind of range our opponent a little bit through the hand. So they've made that 2x from under the gun, extremely wide range there. They c-bet a fairly innocuous board, even though it's better for the big blinds range. I think most players are still going to c-bet that pretty widely, especially the ones that are aggressive, and they tend to be over-betting in spots like this. When the 8 pairs on the turn, we get this comment from Kim here about when the straight comes in, people are going to check behind with their over pairs. And I think some players are also going to not c-bet that paired turn because it's so good for our range, unless they have a value hand. So that's that one point here where I feel like, do I respect my opponent enough to think that they see this board and know that it's not when they're supposed to be turn c-betting on?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I do, they probably have a value hand. And if I don't, then they just don't understand that this is my board. and they're bluffing, and I should keep calling them down. And then on the river, what are the hands that they check back instead of value betting here? And Kim says like the over pairs would be a good example there, because now we've got this 6, 8, 9 run out, and you've got to have something if you're still coming along in the hand. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the problem is it's in tension with this read you have on this opponent, which is just that they're spazzy. They're going to be punting off a lot.
Yeah, and they're just, I think they're the kind of player, like the question is a really good one. What are the bluffs here? But this is a player I've seen arrive with just air bluffs, those kinds of, and I've seen it, I think 2 or 3 times, go to showdown, and they've been fairly aggressive, and it's just they're air balls, and there's no rhyme. It's not like they got blockers. There's not like, I mean, I think some of the best bluffs here are, having a 7 in your hand would be great. Having even a 10 in your hand would be great. But I wouldn't put this past this player to just show up with Queen Jack or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, as played, it sounds like you followed through on your plan.
I did follow through and called. I ultimately just decided that I've come this far. My hand improved. I can have some better hands that I show up here with, but this is at least upward in my distribution, and that kind of arrives this way, taking a total check call line down the line. So I elect to call, and they turn over ace 8.
Boo!
So,
Trip ace.
So,
that stinks.
But
and it was offsuit too. It was the ace of diamonds, ace of spades,
which again
diamonds,
also just suggests, like this player is really, I mean, that even just seeing, even though it's an ace, right? Seeing ace 8 offsuit from under the gun in a 9-ring table, that's in the money. That's a tough table. Like that's loose, right? Yep, and so like loose. We have the right read, but sometimes loose players hit big hands too. So
yeah, and I think. And Kim makes a point here that when you call turn, you have to call a river for the sizing. And I think that's right. And I think the worst thing you can do on a run out like this, because when you think about all the different runouts that could come, right? If the river is like a king or an ace or something, and you're still sitting there with a 1-pair hand, I think it's a different story. But when your plan is to call on runouts that favor you, the worst thing you can do is call, fold, right? Because then you just should have folded in the first place. Because all you've done is only versus this player type. That's right. So you kind of have to screw your courage up. You have to screw yourself to the sticking point, and just decide that that's what you're going to do.
And I think it's one that I looked back on, and obviously did kind of. Then I hit some hands where it's just unlucky. This one was sort of began the meltdown, and then like other things went wrong, but it wasn't nothing like this. But I think one of the things that I was thinking about is like when I've got this big of a chip lead, do I need to put myself in this position against a player that's sort of like gonna just increase the variance no matter what? Do I, like some of this is like, well, I got to do this against this player type and I've got to play this way. But sometimes part of my question was, do we need to put ourselves in these kinds of tough spots against a player like this when we're cruising along fourth in chips? And I don't know what the right answer is, because obviously it's nice to take advantage of a spewy player and, get more chips. But when you've got that big of a chip lead, maybe we really don't need to even put ourselves in this kind of spot. I don't know. So those are some of the things I've been thinking about as I look back at this hand. But
from a pure chip EV point of view, do you think that the way you played it was the way to maximize your equity?
I really like I like what some people have been saying about the some of these check raise spots. In fact, I think the most interesting one to me is the flop check raise, because I think that is going to that's going to give us a sense of this player's hand a little bit more. I think when we've got a player who's shown so much willingness to be aggressive with air, that until we put them in a space where they actually have to sort of reveal themselves, they're just going to keep either bluffing or having it and betting. And we're not really learning anything like there's a lot of players when I see this turn bet on this card where I'd be like, oh my God, we're in deep trouble. But with this player, I didn't think that at all. But it was true. And so I think I like that line with the flop, a potential flop check raise.
The reason I was kind of asking is it seems to me that it very well may be the case that the way that you played it was the way to maximize your chip EV, but also to maximize your variance. And, given you do want to, in tournaments, decrease your variance to some extent. So maybe it's not the most optimal play. But I was kind of just wondering if you think this would, if you're sitting in a cash game, you can reload, there's no ICM pressure, is trapping that player or playing passively against that player the best way to make money?
Yeah. Okay. I think in a cash game, I would do this against this type of player. In a cash game, I would play this way for sure.
So then you just have to figure out whether or not, because it's a tournament, you want to decrease your variance, and then maybe the check raise way is do it. You still let them spew a little bit of money on the pot, but you don't let them get lucky later on, and you decrease their variance. And obviously, if they fight back, you at that point you have to take a read on them and see whether or not they're capable of just doing that blindly, or whether they're more like, as long as they're initiating the aggression, because that's the way a lot of players are. Is they aren't going to 3-bet you very often, but they'll raise you quite a bit.
Right. Yeah.
And the flop spot's really interesting, I think, just because it's a real point of tension where I was going to say, like, I might be more inclined to check raise, like, because as it is with the 6-9, you've got some draw equity still. You've got middle pair. Like, you have enough equity that you don't really need to add the check raise fold equity to it to continue. Doesn't make it not a good decision. But I wonder with a different hand, like with bottom pair there, if you'd like paired the 3, or if you just felt like you had less showdown equity. And I think this is a tension for some recreational players like us too. They're not sure. It's like, well, should I be check raising because I have no chance to win the hand, or should I be check raising because I have good equity and maybe I'll improve on a later street? And I think the answer is kind of like, it depends on the opponent that you're trying to use this tool against. Some opponents, you want to just give them a chance to fold all their garbage, and some of them, they're not going to fold as much, and you actually need to have some equity on future streets when they do proceed. So I don't know. It's a real interesting tension. I'm not sure there's an obvious answer to that, to me here anyway.
Yeah.
A question from Roger in the chat. Would you call his open from the button? And I'm not sure if they mean, would you 3-bet instead, or in that spot with 6-9?
Oh, from the button? If he opened...
Oh, if you were in the button, I guess is what he's saying. Yeah, Roger, type in quick if you meant who was in the button.
If Dylan's in the button, or if I'm in the button.
So the early position 2x and you're in the button. So he says, would you call then, or fold, or raise?
No. Yeah, no. I don't. I mean, the thing that I really liked about the big blind is I'm up against this player heads up. I don't like messing around flatting with 6-9 of hearts with 2 players left hack behind me. If I was going to do something with 6-9 hearts on the button, it would be to 3-bet for sure.
And that's another one of those great tensions in the game, right? Because in the button, you're going to be in position, which is great. And so that's something that you should widen your range there a little bit. But in the big blind, you get a better price, even though you're going to be out of bounds or out of position. But when you're in the button, you don't get to close the action. Yeah. So
we should call it out of bounds more on that.
out of
People
bounds.
might
That's
say
how
it
it should
less.
be. It should be out of bounds. You should be thinking about it as being out of bounds. And we got a couple of great comments in the forum itself. One from Taylor Moss, who's saying that it's basically feels like pretty standard call down lines. So if that's the way you've sized up your opponent, I think that's the right way to play it. And Chapo says he'd be inclined to call down as played, but might have decided to dance with the villain only when I had position, because everything else I would play tight against these guys because they're so random and aggressive. And he also says he wonders what would have happened here if you'd taken the initiative away at some part in the hand. And yeah, I think, as when he has the trip eights, that's not going to go very well. But against the range, I think that is an interesting question.
Well, we might have, but I think if we check raise on this flop, we still might have, even if we find out, oh, they actually have something on that flop, I think we might end up losing less.
Yep.
So that's sort of, it's sort of an interesting thing to think about as well.
And that's one real key. I think people worry about, oh, well, if I raise, I'm going to lose more chips. And that's really not always the case, because often when you call, you end up in positions where you have to call and call again later. Check raise to 50% pot, 25% pot is going to end up being smaller than just calling 3 streets. A 3-bet pre-flop is only going to be 7 or 8 big blinds, and you can find out right there in a lot of ways. So people should be thinking about 2 bets and 3 bets post flop and free flop as a way to save some chips in those spots where you're just going to be guessing and calling in behind.
That is assuming you have the ability to fold after you learn that information.
Yeah, good point. Obviously, because some of us don't have the ability to fold at all.
Well, yeah.
And, Tommy says fold pre. Tommy's never wrong. So if that's what Tommy says,
indeed. Although he is a cash game player, but I think actually in a cash game this would make more sense to play than maybe what we've talked about here. So
he's a cash game player who's not afraid of folding. So
yeah, for sure. Especially out of position, right?
That's right.
Just fold out of position every time. So.
All right. Well, this was really good. I love these conversations. I'd like to thank Kim and Roger and Stewie for joining us in the chat. And of course, Chris and John and Rob for joining me on the panel here. Website AMP, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and everyone at Rec Poker that makes this so much fun for us every week. See you next time.